Penguin Random House Audio presents Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. By Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. This is the author, Jake Tapper. To Jennifer, Alice, and Jack, you are my everything. Jake. To Mom and Dad, thanks for putting up with me. Alex. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Ulysses, Alfred Lord Tennyson. They told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie. I am not ague-proof. King Lear, William Shakespeare. Author's note. Our only agenda is to present the disturbing reality of what happened in the White House and the Democratic presidential campaign in 2023 to 2024, as told to us by approximately 200 people, including lawmakers and White House and campaign insiders, some of whom may never acknowledge speaking to us, but all of whom know the truth within these pages. Most of the information laid out in this book was shared with us after the election of 2024, when officials and aides felt considerably freer to talk. There are very few people named herein with whom we didn't speak. Our most important sources were Democrats inside and outside the White House who were grappling with how so many of them had been so focused on convincing voters that Donald Trump was a true existential threat to the nation that they put blinders on, participating in a charade that delivered the election directly into Trump's hands. Some spoke to us with regret that they hadn't done more, or that they had waited so long to talk to the press about what was going on behind the scenes. Many were angry and felt deeply betrayed, not just by Biden, but by his inner circle of advisors, his allies, and his family. They had seen bad moments behind the scenes, but had been assured all was well. And then came the debate. Listeners who are convinced that Joe Biden was little more than a husk from the very beginning of his presidency, barely capable of stringing two sentences together, will not find support for that view here. Nor will this book satisfy those seeking comfort that he was, through to the end, unaddled and perfectly capable of being president 24/7, that his rumored deterioration was all right-wing propaganda. This is also false. As Biden's presidency ended, it was difficult to find many top Democrats outside his immediate circle of family and closest aides who thought he could ably serve a second four-year term. This book is not an exoneration of the candidacy or presidencies of Biden's opponent, Donald Trump. Journalism about Biden does not excuse or normalize any actions and statements by anyone else, including the 45th and now 47th president. Indeed, for those who tried to justify the behavior described here because of the threat of a second Trump term, those fears should have shocked them into reality, not away from it. The lessons from this book go beyond one man and one political party. They speak to more universal questions about cognitive dissonance, groupthink, courage, cowardice, and patriotism. George Orwell once wrote that we are all capable of believing things which we know to be untrue, and then when we are finally proved wrong, impudently twisting the facts so as to show that we were right. Intellectually, it is possible to carry on this process for an indefinite time. The only check on it is that sooner or later, a false belief bumps up against solid reality, usually on a battlefield. He was writing about World War II, but he could have been writing about any time, any era. The Germans and the Japanese lost the war quite largely because their rulers were unable to see facts which were plain to any dispassionate eye, Orwell went on. To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. Here is what was in front of our noses. Jake and Alex. Chapter 1. He totally fucked us. President Joe Biden got out of bed the day after the 2024 election convinced that he had been wronged. The elites, the Democratic officials, the media, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, they shouldn't have pushed him out of the race. If he had stayed in, he would have beaten Donald Trump. That's what the polls suggested, he would say, again and again. His pollsters told us that no such polls existed. There was no credible data, they said, to support the notion that he would have won. All unspun information suggested it would have been a loss, likely a spectacular one, far worse than that suffered by his replacement as Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. The disconnect between Biden's optimism and the unhappy reality of poll results was a constant throughout his administration. Many insiders sensed that his inner circle shielded him from bad news. It's also true that for Biden to absorb those poll results, he would have had to face the biggest issue driving them. The public had concluded, long before most Democratic officials, media, and other elites had, that he was far too old to do the job. In truth, before that consequential June 27, 2024 presidential debate, many insiders, people with a much better window into Biden's condition than the wider public had, saw things that shocked them. Most of them said nothing. President Biden awoke the morning after the election sure that he was not to blame. 2.5 miles away, north on Connecticut Avenue Northwest, then west on Massachusetts, Harris walked solemnly into the dining room of the vice president's residence at the U.S. Naval Observatory. She was joined that morning by her husband, Doug Emhoff, her sister Maya, and her brother-in-law, Tony West. They were incredulous. It was real. It wasn't a nightmare. It had really happened. They knew that they'd been running from behind, that their challenge had been considerable. They'd had only 107 days to convince America that the vice president, to a historically unpopular president, would be a change agent. They had hoped that the margin of error in the polls they saw would break their way. The enthusiasm they felt on the trail was tangible. They were hopeful. But overnight, the TV networks had called the race for Trump. Sitting at the breakfast table, Harris knew she would have to call the president-elect and concede. And then she would have to finish the speech she never wanted to give. Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. So goes an old saying President John F. Kennedy invoked after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Few Democrats were running around claiming paternity of the political wipeout that was the 2024 campaign. No one thought that the Harris campaign had been without error, but for the most knowledgeable Democratic officials and donors, and for top members of the Harris campaign, there was no question about the father of this election calamity. It was Joe Biden. Harris, loyal to Biden to a fault, might never say such a thing. But plenty of people around her would. We got so screwed by Biden as a party, David Plouffe, who helped run the Harris campaign, told us. Plouffe had served as Senator Barack Obama's presidential campaign manager in 2008, and as a senior advisor to President Obama before largely retiring from politics in 2013. After Biden dropped out of the race on July 21, 2024, Plouffe was drafted to help Harris in what he saw as a rescue mission. Harris, he said, was a great soldier, but the compressed 107-day race was a fucking nightmare. And it's all Biden, Plouffe said. Referring to Biden's decision to run for re-election, then wait more than 3 weeks to bow out, Plouffe added, "He totally fucked us." This isn't the typical finger-pointing of a losing campaign. Before the 2020 primaries, in December 2019, 4 Biden advisors, in what Politico reporter Ryan Lizza read as a strategic leak to get the idea out into the open, told Lizza that it would be virtually inconceivable that he will run for re-election in 2024, when he would be the first octogenarian president. "Look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else," Biden reiterated in March 2020, as he was on the verge of capturing the Democratic nomination. Instead, supported by his senior advisors and his wife and family, the oldest president in American history announced in April 2023 that he would run again. This meant potentially being president until he was 86. It was the clear limitations of his abilities, which got worse throughout his presidency. What the public saw of the realities of his functioning was concerning. What was going on in private was worse. While Biden, on a day-in, day-out basis, could certainly make decisions and assert wisdom and act as president, there were several significant issues that complicated his presidency. A limit to the hours in which he could reliably function, and an increasing number of
Sample complete. Ready to continue?